Imagine a room full of people, all talking at once, yet every head turns when one person speaks. No raised voice, no dramatic gesture, just a quiet sentence that lands like a stone in still water, sending ripples through the entire conversation. That person isn't trying to lead. They simply are. You've felt it before, that magnetic pull towards someone who seems to carry an invisible authority, an effortless command that doesn't demand obedience but somehow receives it anyway. This is calm dominance, the secret energy that turns ordinary moments into turning points and quiet presence into lasting influence. It isn't about power over others, it's about power within yourself, so complete that the world adjusts around you. In the pages of this audiobook, we're going to walk together through the hidden architecture of this energy, how it's been recognized by philosophers and warriors for thousands of years, how modern science now measures it in heartbeats and brain waves, and how you can awaken it in the smallest choices of your everyday life. By the time we reach the final chapter, you won't need to try to lead. You'll simply notice that people have started following. Let's begin. Chapter 1, The Stillness That Moves Mountains. Chapter leaders, the ones whose names echo through centuries, rarely began with a plan to conquer. They began with a stillness so complete that the chaos around them had no choice but to organize itself. In the spring of 480 BCE, a small band of Spartans stood at the narrow pass of Thermopylae, facing an invading Persian army that outnumbered them by hundreds to one. The Persian king, Xerxes, waited 4 days for the Greeks to flee. They didn't. On the 5th morning he sent his emissaries forward with an offer: lay down your arms and live as honored guests in the greatest empire the world had ever seen. The Spartan king Leonidas listened without expression, then turned to a young soldier beside him and asked for his cloak. The boy handed it over. Leonidas draped it across his shoulders, adjusted the clasp, and only then answered the emissaries, "Come and take them." No shouting, no threats, just 8 words delivered in the same tone you might use to ask for more bread at dinner. The emissaries returned to Xerxes, pale and trembling. Within hours, the Persian advance faltered, not because the Spartans had swung a single sword, but because something in that quiet refusal had cracked the illusion of inevitability. Modern science now has a name for what Leonidas embodied: autonomic coherence. Researchers at the HeartMath Institute hook people to sensors that measure the tiny fluctuations in heart rate that happen between beats. When you're anxious, the pattern looks like a jagged lightning bolt. When you're enraged, it's a series of sharp spikes. But when you're in a state of calm dominance, the pattern smooths into gentle rolling waves, like breath on a sleeping child. The fascinating part? This coherence doesn't just feel good, it broadcasts. The electromagnetic field generated by the heart is 60 times stronger than the one produced by the brain, and it extends several feet beyond the body. Stand near someone whose heart is coherent, and your own nervous system begins to synchronize within minutes. Leonidas didn't need to raise his voice because his physiology was already speaking in a language older than words. I once watched this principle unfold in a glass-walled conference room in Midtown Manhattan. A tech startup was pitching to a room of venture capitalists who had already turned down 47 companies that morning. The founder, a soft-spoken woman named Maya, wore no blazer, no power heel, just jeans and a faded university sweatshirt. When her turn came, she didn't launch into the slide deck. She walked to the window, looked out at the Hudson River for a long moment, then turned and asked the investors what scared them most about the future of their own children. The room went still. One partner, a man known for interrupting founders mid-sentence, found himself describing his daughter's anxiety about climate change. Another admitted his fear that his son would never know financial security. Maya listened without nodding too eagerly, without rushing to comfort. When the last voice faded, she said simply, "Our platform measures exactly the data your kids will need to sleep at night." She clicked to the first slide. By the time she reached the third, 3 partners were leaning forward, unconsciously mirroring the relaxed slope of her shoulders. She raised $20 million in 12 minutes. Afterward, the lead investor confessed he couldn't remember a single valuation metric from her deck. He only remembered how safe he suddenly felt in her presence. The difference between force and influence is the difference between pushing a boulder uphill and removing the pebble that keeps it from rolling down on its own. Calm dominance is the art of finding the pebble. It begins with the body, because the body is the only part of you that never lies. Every thought you have, every emotion you suppress, registers first in the muscles of your face, the tension in your jaw, the shallow catch in your breath. Most of us walk around broadcasting a low-grade static of worry that other people register unconsciously as untrustworthiness. The first step toward calm dominance is to become the kind of person whose nervous system feels like a warm hearth on a winter night. Try this tonight. Sit in a chair with your feet flat on the floor. Place one hand on your chest, the other just below your navel. Close your eyes and notice the temperature of your exhale against your upper lip. Now imagine that each breath is pulling a thread of golden light from the base of your spine up through the crown of your head. And on the exhale, the light spreads outward in widening circles like a pebble dropped in a pond. Don't force the image. Let it float. After 5 minutes, open your eyes and notice the quality of silence in the room. It will feel different, thicker, as though the air itself has decided to hold still for you. That is the first taste of autonomic coherence, the physiological root of calm dominance. In the chapters ahead, we'll travel deeper into the 10 hidden currents that feed this energy. How to turn fear into fuel without ever raising your voice. How to speak so that even your silence is heard. How to build alliances that feel like family reunions. How to make decisions that ripple forward for decades. Each current is a muscle, and like any muscle, it strengthens through use rather than theory. The Spartan at Thermopylae, the founder in the glass room, the parent calming a tantruming toddler in the grocery aisle, they all discovered the same secret. When your inner state is unshakable, the outer world bends to accommodate it. Let's walk the first step together into the stillness that moves mountains. Chapter 2. The Quiet Flame Mastering the Art of Unreactive Presence. The year was 1279, and the Mongol fleet stretched across the South China Sea like a dark tide. Kublai Khan had sent 100,000 men to crush the last remnants of the Song dynasty, and on the eve of the final battle, a single Chinese war junk drifted through the enemy lines under cover of night. Aboard it was a scholar named Wen Dianxiang, captured months earlier and offered every luxury if he would swear loyalty to the Khan. He had refused, and now, chained in the hold, he listened to the creak of oars and the muffled commands of the Mongol captains. A guard came below with a bowl of rice and, in broken Chinese, offered one last chance to save his life. Wen looked up slowly, his face lit only by the lantern the guard carried. He took the bowl, ate 3 deliberate mouthfuls, then set it down and said, "Tell your master that a man who has already died inside cannot be killed twice." The guard left without another word. The next morning, when the Mongol admiral demanded Wen be brought on deck to witness the annihilation of his people, the prisoner walked barefoot across the blood-slick planks, stopped in the exact center of the ship, and began to recite a poem about plum blossoms in winter. The admiral raised his sword to silence him, but something in the scholar's voice, steady, unhurried, almost conversational, made the blade hesitate. By the time the poem ended, half the Mongol sailors had lowered their weapons, not out of mercy, but because the moment felt suddenly sacred, as though the war itself had paused to listen. Wen was executed at sunset, yet decades later, Mongol children in Hangzhou could still recite his plum blossom lines. The admiral who ordered the beheading kept a copy of the poem folded inside his armor until the day he died. What Wen Tianxiang carried into that hold was the second current of calm dominance, unreactive presence. It is the ability to remain internally still while the external world detonishes around you. Modern neuroscience calls this the pause between stimulus and response, a gap measured in milliseconds that separates the triggered animal from the conscious human. In brain scans, it appears as a momentary dip in amygdala activation followed by a surge in prefrontal cortex engagement. In plain language, it is the difference between being the storm and being the eye that watches the storm pass overhead. I once sat in a Tokyo subway car at rush hour, pressed shoulder to shoulder with salarymen whose faces had settled into the gray exhaustion of another 17-hour day. At the next stop, a drunk businessman stumbled aboard, tie askew, briefcase swinging like a wrecking ball. He collided with a young woman spilling her coffee across her white blouse. She gasped, the sound sharp enough to cut through the ambient hum. Every head turned. The man began a slurred apology that quickly curdled into accusation. "You should watch where you're standing." The woman's cheeks flushed crimson. You could feel the car bracing for the familiar Tokyo ritual. Public shaming, muttered insults, the slow boil of collective resentment. Then an elderly man near the doors did something no one expected. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a silk handkerchief embroidered with tiny cranes, and held it out to the woman without a word. She took it, dabbed at the stain, and when the drunk lunged again, the old man simply shifted his weight, placing himself between the aggressor and the woman with the same casual grace he might use to step aside for a closing elevator door. The drunk opened his mouth, met the old man's eyes, and closed it again. The train lurched into the next tunnel. By the time we reached Shibuya, the drunk had fallen asleep against a pole, and the woman was folding the handkerchief into a neat square to return. The old man waved it away. "Keep it," he said, voice soft as falling ash. "Cranes bring good luck." No one clapped. No one needed to. The entire car exhaled as one organism, tension leaking out through the soles of 1,000 shoes. In less than 90 seconds, the elder had rewritten the emotional script of a crowded metal box hurtling beneath the city. Unreactive presence is not passivity. Passivity is the absence of choice. Presence is the mastery of it. The elder on the train could have shouted, could have called security, could have done nothing and let the moment fester. Instead, he inserted a single deliberate action into the chain of reactivity and snapped it like a dried twig. This is the alchemy of the quiet flame. It does not roar, yet it consumes the fuel of conflict before the blaze can spread. Ian, let us travel now to a laboratory in Palo Alto, where Dr. Elena Ruiz studies what she calls micro-contagion of effect. She straps lightweight sensors to the wrists of strangers, seats them across a small table, and asks them to sit in silence for 5 minutes. That's it. No conversation, no task, just eye contact optional. In over 70% of pairs, the heart rate variability of the more coherent partner begins to entrain the less coherent one within the first 2 minutes. The effect is strongest when the coherent partner maintains a soft gaze and relaxed jaw. Dr. Ruiz's favorite demonstration involves a former Marine who survived 3 tours in Afghanistan and now suffers from PTSD. On his first visit, his heart rhythm looks like a seismograph during an earthquake. She pairs him with a grandmother from Oaxaca who knits tiny dolls for hospitalized children. They sit. The Marine's shoulders are rigid, his breathing shallow. The grandmother's needles click in a slow, even rhythm. At minute 3, the Marine's exhale lengthens by half a second. At minute 4, his fingers unclench. By the end of the session, his coherence score has risen from 0.2 to 0.8. Numbers that typically require weeks of biofeedback training. When Dr. Ruiz asks what happened, the Marine shrugs. "She smelled like my abuela's kitchen," he says. "I just remembered how to breathe." The body keeps the score, but it also keeps the antidote. Every traumatic memory is stored not just in the mind, but in the fascia, the vagus nerve, the microscopic tremors of the diaphragm. Unreactive presence is the gentle rewiring of that storage system, one regulated breath at a time. It is why hostage negotiators are trained to lower their vocal pitch by 15% before picking up the phone. Why surgeons play classical music in the operating theater, why the best labor and delivery nurses hum under their breath while checking fetal monitors. The nervous system is a tuning fork. Strike it with harmony, and the whole room begins to resonate. Imagine you are standing in line at the airport, and the gate agent has just announced a 6-hour delay due to mechanical failure. The man in front of you explodes. "This is unacceptable. I have a connection in Frankfurt." His voice ricochets off the tile floors. People shuffle backward, creating a small island of agitation. You feel the familiar heat rising in your own chest. Solidarity, maybe, or the contagious injustice of it all. This is the moment where most of us either join the chorus or retreat into our phones. The path of the quiet flame offers a third option. You close your eyes for one full second, long enough to notice the temperature of the air on your cheeks, the weight of your carry-on strap across your shoulder. Then you open your eyes and look, not at the angry man, but at the gate agent. She is 23, maybe 24, name tag reading K. Singh, and her hand trembles as she grips the microphone. You step out of line, walk to the counter, and in a voice just loud enough for her to hear, say, "Kay, take a sip of water. We're not the enemy." She meets your eyes, startled, then does exactly that. The angry man is still shouting, but something in the air has shifted. The sharp edge of his words now glances off an invisible shield. Within minutes, other passengers begin offering their charging cables, their snacks, their jokes about airline food. The delay becomes a strange, impromptu community. When boarding finally begins, Kay Singh finds you at the gate. "Thank you," she whispers. "I thought I was going to cry." You smile, board the plane, and sleep the entire flight. Your nervous system has done more diplomacy than a dozen UN resolutions. The practice is deceptively simple, which is why most people skip it. They want techniques with acronyms, apps with gamified streaks, certificates to hang on the wall. The quiet flame asks for none of that. It asks only that you become the kind of person who can feel a surge of adrenaline and choose not to ride it. Start with the body because the body is honest. The next time you feel the heat of reactivity, whether it's road rage, a snide email, or your teenager slamming a bedroom door, pause and inventory 3 sensations: the temperature in your palms, the weight of your tongue against the roof of your mouth, the exact point where your rib cage expands on the inhale. Name them silently. This micro-practice hijacks the amygdala's alarm signal and routes it through the prefrontal cortex, buying you the half-second Viktor Frankl called the space between stimulus and response. In that half-second, freedom lives. Let us return to Wen Tianxiang in the hold of the Mongol ship. Chained, starving, facing certain death, he still had access to that half-second. Instead of cursing his captors, he ate the rice. Instead of pleading, he recited poetry. Every choice was a declaration. My mind may be imprisoned, but my presence is not for sale. Centuries earlier, the Stoic philosopher Epictetus, born a slave, taught the same principle from a dirt floor in Rome. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. The quiet flame is the visible expression of that strength, a light that needs no fuel from the outside world because it burns the purified essence of attention itself. I knew a firefighter in Colorado named Diego who carried this flame into burning buildings. On his third call as captain, his crew entered a split-level house fully engulfed on the second floor. The stairs had already collapsed. A child's cry echoed from below. Diego's lieutenant wanted to vent the roof immediately, standard protocol to release heat and smoke. Diego knelt, pressed his gloved hand to the floor, and felt the temperature gradient. Too hot, too fast. Venting now would flash the entire structure. He looked up, met each crew member's eyes for one heartbeat, and said, "We go low, we go slow, we go together." No shouting, no panic. They crawled single file through the basement, found the child curled beneath a workbench, and carried her out through a window well, just as the ceiling above them gave way. Afterward, the incident report cited exemplary command presence. Diego laughed when he read it. "I was terrified," he told me over coffee. "But I remembered my dad teaching me to start a campfire. One match, one breath, one patient twist of the wrist. Rush it, and the flame dies. Same with the crew." He tapped his chest. "Keep this steady, and they'll follow you through hell." The quiet flame is not the absence of fear, it is the transcendence of it. Fear is data, useful, evolutionary, loud. The mistake is to mistake the messenger for the message. When the amygdala screams, "Danger," the prefrontal cortex can answer, "Noted, now what?" That dialogue is the birthplace of unreactive presence. Over time, the dialogue becomes instinct. The body learns that danger and destruction are not the same thing, that a racing heart can coexist with a steady hand. Consider the Japanese art of kintsugi, the practice of repairing broken pottery with lacquer mixed with powdered gold. The repaired vessel is not merely functional, it is more beautiful for having been broken. The cracks become rivers of light. Unreactive presence is the human equivalent of kintsugi. Every time you choose pause over punch, breath over bite, curiosity over contempt, you are tracing molten gold along the fissures of your own history. The scars remain, but they glow. Let us end this chapter with a practice you can carry into the chaos of your next ordinary day. Call it the 3-breath reset. The moment you notice reactivity rising, heat in the face, tightness in the throat, the urge to interrupt, take 3 deliberate breaths. On the first, feel your feet. On the second, soften your jaw. On the third, imagine a single candle flame at the center of your chest, steady even as wind howls around it. Then act or don't. The choice is yours, but it will no longer be hijacked by the ancient wiring that mistakes a traffic jam for a saber-toothed tiger. Do this daily, and within weeks you will notice strangers relaxing in your presence, children telling you secrets they haven't told their parents, dogs ceasing to bark as you pass. You are becoming the room the storm walks around. In the next chapter, we'll explore how this inner flame becomes a beacon others instinctively trust, how calm dominance creates alliances that feel less like transactions and more like destiny. For now, carry the quiet flame into the next conversation, the next crisis, the next ordinary moment that is secretly begging to be transformed. The world is waiting for the version of you who has already died to reactivity and been reborn in presence. Chapter 3. The Invisible Thread Weaving Trust That Needs No Words. In the winter of 1887, a Lakota medicine man named Black Elk stood on a frozen ridge above the Pine Ridge Reservation and watched U.S. cavalry troops herd his people toward the barracks that would become their prison. The wind carried the smell of snow and gun oil. Children clung to their mothers' blankets. Old men muttered prayers to spirits the soldiers could not see. Black Elk was 24, already famous for the vision he'd received at age 9, a vision of thunder beings who promised that one day the sacred hoop of his nation would be mended. Now the hoop lay in splinters. A lieutenant rode forward, carbine across his saddle, and demanded through an interpreter that Black Elk surrender the eagle feather tucked behind his ear, symbol of his spiritual authority. Black Elk removed the feather slowly, turned it once so the morning light caught the iridescence, then stepped forward and placed it not in the lieutenant's hand but on the frozen ground between them. He said nothing. The lieutenant dismounted, confused, and picked up the feather. In that instant, every Lakota on the ridge straightened. The lieutenant felt it, the shift like a tide turning though no water moved. He handed the feather back without a word, black elk tucked it behind his ear again, turned and walked down the slope. The troops followed at a distance, suddenly unsure who was leading whom. Years later, the lieutenant, retired, gray, drinking coffee in a Nebraska kitchen, told his grandson that he could never explain why he had obeyed a prisoner who never gave an order. "It was as if," he said, "an invisible thread pulled me after him." That thread is the third current of calm dominance, the silent weaving of trust. It is not built with contracts or charisma. It is grown in the soil of consistent, wordless reliability. Neuroscientists measure it in oxytocin spikes and mirror neuron cascades. Anthropologists find it in every hunter-gatherer band that survived the Ice Age. Spiritual traditions call it grace. Whatever the label, it is the felt sense that this person, in this moment, will not betray the fragile web that holds us all. I first touched the edge of this thread in a pediatric oncology ward in Glasgow. The nurse, Moira, had worked the night shift for 12 years. She moved between beds like moonlight across water, never hurried, never loud. One evening I watched her approach a 6-year-old boy named Finn, whose leukemia had returned for the third time. His mother sat rigid beside the bed, eyes swollen from crying. Finn was refusing the lumbar puncture that might buy him another month. The oncologist had already tried reasoning, bargaining, gentle threats. Finn only burrowed deeper under the blanket. Moira entered without knocking, carrying no tray, no clipboard. She simply sat on the edge of the bed, placed her hand on the lump that was Finn's shoulder, and began to hum a tune I later learned was an old Scottish lullaby about Selkies swimming home. 30 seconds. That was all. Finn's head emerged. His mother's breathing slowed when Moira whispered, "Ready, love?" Finn nodded. The procedure took 4 minutes. Afterward, the oncologist asked Moira what magic she'd used. She shrugged. "I just remembered what it felt like to be 6 and terrified. Then I stayed until the remembering matched his." That is the invisible thread, memory made visible through presence. Trust is not a decision, it is a resonance. The body votes before the mind deliberates. In a series of experiments at Princeton, researchers showed strangers 30-second silent video clips of surgeons interacting with patients before operations. Viewers then guessed which surgeons would be sued for malpractice. They were correct 75% of the time, based only on tone of voice and micro-expressions too fleeting to name. The sued surgeons rushed, interrupted, looked at charts instead of eyes. The trusted ones leaned in, softened their gaze, allowed 2 full heartbeats of silence after the patient finished speaking. The difference was measurable in milliseconds, yet it rewrote destinies. Let us cross the planet to a fishing village on the coast of Senegal. Every dawn the pirogues launch into the Atlantic, colorful wooden canoes crewed by men who have never seen the inside of a boardroom, and their leader is not the strongest or the loudest. It is Papa Ndour, 63, missing 2 fingers from a shark encounter 30 years ago. When a storm brews on the horizon, the younger fishermen watch Papa's hands. He stands at the prow, palms open to the wind, feeling for changes in pressure the way a pianist feels for the weight of a key. If he closes his fists, they turn back. If he spreads his fingers, they row harder. No words. Last season, a Norwegian NGO arrived with satellite weather apps and tried to override Papa's judgment. The app predicted calm seas. Papa closed his fists. The Norwegians laughed, launched anyway. That night, a rogue wave capsized 3 canoes. Papa's fleet returned at dusk, fish holes brimming, every man alive. The next morning, the NGO director asked for a meeting. Papa listened, nodded once, then invited the man to spend a dawn on the water. By the end of the week, the satellite gear sat unused in a corner while the village boys learned to read the wind the way their grandfathers had. Trust, once earned, needs no translation. The invisible thread is spun from 3 strands: predictability, attunement, and benevolent indifference to outcome. Predictability is not boredom. It is the rhythm that allows the heart to relax. A mother who sings the same 3 notes every night as she closes the bedroom door teaches her child that the world contains patterns worth trusting. Attunement is the micro-mirroring of breath, posture, blink rate, the unconscious dance that says, I see you and it is safe to be seen. Benevolent indifference means you hold the thread without clutching it. You are willing to be wrong, to lose the fish, to watch the child cry, because the relationship is not a transaction. Paradoxically, this looseness is what makes the thread unbreakable. I once coached a CEO named Daniel whose company was hemorrhaging talent. Glassdoor reviews called the culture toxic brilliance. Daniel was a visionary, numbers in his head like constellations, product launches that made headlines, yet every quarterly all hands ended in tears. Employees felt seen only when they failed. I asked Daniel to spend 1 week doing absolutely nothing differently except this. At the start of every meeting, he would place both palms flat on the table and count 5 silent breaths before speaking. Just 5. On day 3, his VP of engineering interrupted him mid-sentence, an old habit. Daniel's shoulders twitched, the familiar heat rising. Then he remembered the palms, the breaths. He finished the 5th exhale, looked at the VP, and said, I'm listening. The VP blinked, restarted, and for the first time in 2 years, finished a thought without being corrected. By Friday, the head of HR slipped a note under Daniel's door. Whatever you're doing, don't stop. People are smiling in the hallways. 6 months later, voluntary turnover had dropped 42%. Daniel still couldn't explain it. I just gave them 5 seconds of nothing, he said. Turns out nothing was what they'd been starving for. The thread thickens in the gaps. Silence is not empty, it is the loom. In Japanese tea ceremony, the host pauses after every deliberate movement, pouring water, folding the cloth, placing the bowl, so that guests can feel the space between actions. That space is where trust ferments. Western culture fears it. We fill silence with filler words, slide decks, nervous jokes. The result is a kind of relational static that prevents true connection. The next time you feel the urge to speak simply to keep the air moving, try this. Imagine you are holding a soap bubble on your fingertip. One extra puff and it bursts. Let the bubble rest. Let the other person decide whether to blow or to watch it shimmer. 9 times out of 10, they will lean closer. Let us travel now to the Amazon rainforest, where the Yanomami people still practice shapono, living in a single circular communal house that holds 200 souls under one thatched roof. Disputes are inevitable. When tempers flare, the aggrieved parties do not argue in the center. They walk to opposite sides of the circle and begin to chant their grievances to the rafters. The chants are not addressed to each other, but to the ancestors woven into the roof beams. Everyone else keeps working, grinding manioc, nursing babies, sharpening arrows, as if nothing is happening. After an hour, the chanters' voices soften. After 2, they begin to harmonize. By nightfall, they are sitting side by side, sharing a gourd of fermented pineapple. Anthropologists call this diffuse sanctioning. I call it the invisible thread stretched to its thinnest, yet never breaking. The community trusts the process because the process has outlived every individual ego. Modern boardrooms could learn from the Chaponneau. I once mediated a merger between 2 Silicon Valley giants whose founders had not spoken civilly in a year. The negotiation room smelled of burnt coffee and barely contained rage. I borrowed from the Yanomami. Instead of opening with agendas, I asked each founder to stand at opposite ends of the table and speak their greatest fear aloud, not to each other, but to the potted ficus in the corner. The first founder muttered about betrayal, the second whispered about obsolescence, then silence. 5 minutes, 10. The venture capitalists checked their watches. At minute 12, the first founder laughed, a short, surprised bark. I sound like my father, he said. The second founder joined in, a low chuckle that grew until both men were wiping their eyes. The deal closed 3 hours later with a handshake and no lawyers present. The ficus, I'm told, still thrives. The thread is fragile. Only when we forget it is also elastic. Children test it daily. A 3-year-old melts down in the cereal aisle because the box is the wrong color. The parent who kneels, meets the child's eyes and says, I see you're furious, I'm right here, is not surrendering, they are tightening the weave. The tantrum spends itself against the immovable fact of presence. 10 minutes later, the child is pushing the cart, humming, the thread held. Let us linger with children, because they are the world's most honest trust detectors. In a longitudinal study at the University of Virginia, researchers followed infants from 6 months to age 5. The single strongest predictor of secure attachment was not income, not parental education, not the number of bedtime stories. It was the percentage of times a caregiver accurately read and responded to the infant's cues within 3 seconds. 3 seconds, that is the width of the invisible thread in its most primal form. Miss it repeatedly, and the child learns the world is a place where signals disappear into the void. Meet it consistently, and the child grows into an adult who walks into rooms believing connection is possible. I knew a grandfather in Tuscany who understood this instinctively. Every Sunday he took his granddaughter Lucia to feed the ducks at the Arno. Lucia was 4, autistic, largely nonverbal. Most adults tried to coax words from her the way one might coax a cat from under a bed. Nonno Renato simply matched her pace. If she squatted to study a pebble for 7 minutes, he squatted. If she flapped her hands at the clouds, he flapped in mirror rhythm. One spring morning, Lucia pointed at a duckling struggling against the current. Renato followed her gaze, then slowly extended his arm, palm up, until his hand rested beside hers on the stone parapet. Lucia placed her fingers on his. 10 seconds, 20. Then, clear as cathedral bells, she said, "Help!" Renato did not gasp or cheer. He simply nodded, tore a crust of bread, and together they tossed it into the water. The duckling reached safety. Lucia never spoke again that day, but every Sunday thereafter she reached for Nonno's hand before the ducks appeared. The thread had been tied with a single shared breath. Trust scales. The same principle that calms a child in Tuscany guides nations through crises. In 1962, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, a Soviet submarine captain named Valentin Savitsky believed World War III had begun. American destroyers were dropping depth charges, signaling, not attacking, but Savitsky didn't know that. His battery was dying, air unbreathable, crew collapsing. Protocol required unanimous consent from the 3 senior officers to launch nuclear torpedoes. Savitsky and the political officer voted yes. The 3rd officer, Vasily Arkhipov, said no. In the stifling darkness, with alarms blaring, Arkhipov asked for 5 minutes. He climbed the ladder to the conning tower, opened the hatch, and breathed the cold Atlantic air. 5 minutes of oxygen, 5 minutes of starlight. When he returned, he convinced Savitsky to surface and await orders from Moscow. The world never knew how close it came until decades later. Arkhippov's widow said he never spoke of heroism. He just needed to remember the sky, she said. The invisible thread stretched across an ocean held humanity back from the brink. How then do we cultivate this thread in a world of notifications and hot takes? Begin where Black Elk began, with the willingness to lay down the symbol of your power and trust it will be returned. In practical terms, this means keeping promises so small they seem insignificant. Tell the barista you'll be back tomorrow for the same latte, and be there. Text your friend thinking of you, with no expectation of reply. Show up to the 7 a.m. run, even when it's raining. These micro-commitments are the warp and weft of the loom. Miss one, and the pattern phrase. Honor them, and the fabric grows dense enough to catch dreams. Next, practice benevolent indifference in conversation. The next time someone shares a story, resist the urge to one-up, solve, or soothe. Instead, offer the gift of spacious attention. Let your face soften, your breath slow, your eyes hold theirs without demand. If tears come, let them. If laughter erupts, join it. You are not the protagonist, you are the container. People will remember how you made them feel long after they forget what you said. Finally, create rituals of return. Every relationship needs predictable touch points that say, the thread is still here. For Moira the nurse, it was the lullaby. For Papa Endure, the dawn wind. For Nonno Renato, the ducks. Choose yours. A Tuesday evening walk with your partner where phones stay home. A monthly letter to your aging parent, handwritten, no matter how busy you are. A quarterly coffee with the colleague who once mentored you. Rituals are the knots that keep the thread from unraveling when life yanks hard. Let us end with a practice you can carry into the next room you enter. Call it the palm anchor. Before you cross the threshold, pause for one heartbeat and press your right palm flat against your left forearm. Feel the warmth, the pulse. Silently name one truth about the person or people waiting inside. She is grieving. He is proud of his daughter. They are afraid of failing. Then enter, palm still resting on forearm, carrying that truth like a lantern. Speak when spoken to, but let the lantern do the heavier lifting. Within minutes, you will notice shoulders dropping, voices softening, laughter arriving sooner than expected. You have not manipulated, you have remembered. The invisible thread hums between heartbeats, and for one bright moment, the sacred hoop feels whole again. In the next chapter, we'll follow the thread into the territory of speech, how calm dominance turns words into arrows that find their mark without ever piercing the wrong heart. For now, walk gently. The world is held together by threads thinner than spider silk, and every step you take in trust is a step the universe learns to mirror. Chapter 4. The Velvet Arrow, speaking so the world listens without resistance. In the year 399 BCE, the marketplace of Athens buzzed with the usual chaos of fishmongers, philosophers, and sunburned tourists from Corinth. At the center stood Socrates, barefoot, tunic patched at the elbows, surrounded by a knot of young men eager to watch him dismantle another reputation. On this day, the target was Euthyphro, a self-proclaimed expert on piety, who had come to prosecute his own father for murder. The crowd leaned in, expecting verbal fireworks. Instead, Socrates did something peculiar. He tilted his head, scratched his beard, and asked, "Tell me, Euthyphro, what is piety?" The question floated out soft as dandelion fluff. Euthyphro puffed his chest and launched into a lecture about Zeus and justice. Socrates listened, eyes half closed, until the man finished. Then, gently, he said, "I see, and do the gods love piety because it is pious, or is it pious because the gods love it?" Another velvet arrow. Euthyphro blinked, opened his mouth, closed it. The marketplace quieted. Even the fish seemed to stop flopping. By the time the sun dipped behind the Acropolis, Euthyphro had contradicted himself 6 times and walked away muttering that he was late for an appointment. Socrates never raised his voice, never smirked, never claimed victory. Yet every soul in earshot felt the ground shift beneath their certainties. Plato, watching from the edge, later wrote that his teacher's words were like arrows wrapped in silk. They flew straight to the heart without drawing blood. That is the 4th current of calm dominance, the velvet arrow. It is a speech that penetrates resistance by refusing to announce its own sharpness. Modern linguistics calls it low dominance prosody. Speech patterns marked by descending intonation, slower cadence, and strategic pauses that invite rather than demand. The brain registers it as safety, even when the content is challenging. In MRI studies, subjects exposed to velvet arrow speech show decreased activity in the anterior cingulate cortex, the neural alarm bell for social threat, and increased activation in the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, the seat of trust and reward. Translation: people lean in when you speak this way, even if you're telling them they're wrong. I once watched this principle save a marriage in a cramped therapist's office in Copenhagen. The husband, Lars, had discovered his wife Astrid's emotional affair with a colleague. He arrived clutching a printout of their messages like a smoking gun. The therapist, a soft-spoken woman named Freya, asked Lars to read one message aloud. He began in a voice tight with betrayal. "Why does he get to make you laugh like that?" Astrid flinched, arms crossed. Freya waited until Lars's voice cracked on the last word, then said almost to herself, "I wonder what it feels like to read those words and still to choose to sit in this room." She let the sentence hang. Lars's shoulders dropped a fraction. Astrid's eyes filled. 10 minutes later, Lars was describing the loneliness of night shifts as a paramedic. Astrid was admitting she'd felt invisible since their daughter's birth. By session's end, the printout lay forgotten on the carpet. Freya never mediated, never summarized. She simply fired velvet arrows into the space between them until the armor melted. The velvet arrow has 3 feathers: curiosity, precision, and spaciousness. Curiosity is the fletching that keeps the arrow from veering into judgment. Precision is the shaft, every word chosen for weight and balance. Spaciousness is the silence after release, the trust that the arrow knows its target. Miss any feather, and the shot wobbles. Let us travel to a negotiation tent in the Sinai Desert, 1978. Egyptian President Anwar Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin had spent 11 days shouting past each other at Camp David. Interpreters were hoarse, aides were chain-smoking. On the 12th morning, U.S. President Jimmy Carter entered the Egyptian cabin carrying no briefing papers. Only a photograph of his daughter Amy holding hands with Sadat's granddaughter. He placed it on the table between the two leaders and said, "I promised Amy I'd bring her new friend's grandfather a story about peace." Then he sat. 30 seconds of silence, a full minute. Sadat picked up the photo, studied it, and began to speak. Not about borders or Jerusalem, but about the smell of jasmine in his childhood garden. Begin, who had survived Auschwitz and vowed never to yield an inch of Israeli soil, found himself describing the orange groves of his youth in Brest-Litovsk. Carter said nothing. An hour later, the men were sketching maps on the back of a breakfast menu. The Camp David Accords were born in the space Carter refused to fill with anything but a velvet arrow wrapped in a child's smile. Words are scalpels or sledgehammers. The velvet arrow chooses scalpel and wields it with the tenderness of a lover tracing a scar. I knew a surgeon in Nairobi named Dr. Kamau, who operated on children born with cleft palates. Parents arrived terrified, clutching babies who had never smiled without pain. Before every procedure, Dr. Kamau would kneel so his eyes were level with the mother's, take her trembling hands and say, "Today your child will learn that the world wants to kiss them back." No medical jargon, no false promises, just 6 seconds of poetry. Mothers who had planned to wait outside found themselves nodding permission through tears. Post-operative infection rates in Dr. Kamau's ward were the lowest in East Africa. Nurses swore it was the sentence, not the sutures, that did the healing. The arrow's power lies in its refusal to overshoot. Most of us speak in machine gun bursts, terrified that silence will be mistaken for ignorance. We stack adjectives, hedge with kind of and sort of, or bulldoze with absolutes. Always, never, everyone knows. The velvet arrow travels light. It asks one question at a time, offers one image, lands and waits. Consider the difference between "you're not listening to me" and "I wonder what it would feel like to be heard right now." The first is a grenade. The second is an invitation wrapped in wonder. Let us linger in a high school classroom in Detroit, where a substitute teacher named Mr. Rivera faced 30 sophomores who had chased off 3 subs that semester. The room smelled of sour milk and defiance. On his first day, Mr. Rivera entered carrying no roll sheet, no lesson plan. He walked to the window, opened it, and stood there for a full minute watching pigeons on the ledge. Then he turned and said, "I bet one of you knows why pigeons bob their heads when they walk." A hand shot up. Jamal, varsity basketball suspended twice for fighting. "It's how they keep their eyes steady," Jamal said. Mr. Rivera nodded once, slowly. "Exactly. The world moves, but the pigeon chooses what to focus on." He let that settle. By the end of the period, 30 teenagers were debating optical flow theory using milk cartons as props. Jamal stayed after the bell to ask if college was worth it. Mr. Rivera answered with another velvet arrow. "Only if you want to spend 4 years learning how to bob your head without losing sight of what matters." Jamal enrolled in community college the next fall. He still texts Mr. Rivera every pigeon meme he finds. Precision is the enemy of noise. The average human speaks 125 words per minute, but the brain processes language at 400. That gap is where misunderstanding breeds. The velvet arrow slows the mouth to match the mind. I once coached a political candidate in Bogota who was trailing by 20 points. Her speeches were encyclopedic, data, citations, 10-point plans. Audiences applauded politely and voted for her opponent. I asked her to record herself answering one question: "Why are you running?" She filled 3 minutes with statistics. I played it back and asked, "What do you hear?" She frowned, me trying not to cry. We spent a weekend distilling. On election night, she stepped to the microphone and said, "I'm running because my mother cleaned offices at night so I could go to school in the daytime. I want every child in this city to know that someone is cleaning for them too." 47 words. The crowd roared for 2 full minutes. She won by 12 points. Precision is compassion in linguistic form. Spaciousness is the pause that lets the arrow breathe. In a study at Stanford, researchers interrupted speakers at random intervals. When interruptions came during natural pauses, after a completed thought, speakers recovered gracefully. When cut off mid-sentence, cortisol spiked and coherence plummeted. The velvet arrow respects the sentence's right to finish. It also respects the listener's right to digest. I knew a Jesuit priest in Quebec who counseled death row inmates. Before every visit, he practiced what he called the 3-heartbeat rule. He would state the hardest truth: "You will die in this place." Then count 1, 2, 3 in silence. Inmates who had screamed at previous chaplains wept in those 3 beats. One man, convicted of triple homicide, used the pause to ask, "Will you hold my hand when they strap me down?" The priest's answer was another 3 heartbeats. Then, "I already am." He sat with the man for 2 hours, palms pressed together through the cell bars. The execution went forward, but the warden later said the prisoner's pulse never rose above 72. The velvet arrow can be learned, but not faked. The body betrays insincerity in microseconds: pupil dilation, vocal fry, the micro twitch at the corner of the mouth. Authenticity is the glue that binds curiosity, precision, and spaciousness. I once watched a TED Talk rehearsal implode because the speaker memorized power pauses like stage directions. Every silence felt rehearsed, every question rhetorical. The coach stopped him after 90 seconds. "Speak to one person," she said. "The rest of us are eavesdropping." The speaker closed his eyes, pictured his grandmother, and began again. This time the pauses arrived organically, like breaths between sobs. The talk went viral, not for the data, but for the moment. He said, "I still don't know if I'm right. I just know I can't stay silent." The comment section filled with strangers confessing their own uncertainties. Authenticity is the difference between influence and manipulation. Let us end with a practice woven from all 3 feathers. Call it the 1-sentence mirror. The next time you feel the urge to speak, whether in anger, persuasion, or love, pause and distill your impulse into a single sentence of 12 words or fewer. Then say it aloud to an empty room. recording on your phone. Play it back. Ask, does it invite curiosity? Does every word earn its place? Could I leave space after it for the listener's heart to answer? Revise until the sentence feels like a key sliding into a lock you didn't know was there. Use it in real conversation. Notice how the air changes. A mother in Sao Paulo used this to tell her teenage son, "I miss the sound of your laughter in this house." He came home early that night. A CEO in Singapore said to his board, "What if our greatest risk is succeeding at the wrong thing?" The room approved a pivot that saved the company. 12 words, one breath, a lifetime of ripple. The velvet arrow does not force. It finds the opening that was always there. In the next chapter, we'll follow its flight into the realm of decisions, how calm dominance chooses paths that feel inevitable long after the choice is made. For now, carry one sentence into the next room, the next argument, the next ordinary moment waiting to be pierced by truth wrapped in tenderness. The world is armored, but every armor has a gap. Your task is to speak so gently that the gap widens into a doorway. Chapter 5. The still point, making decisions that echo through time. In the spring of 1429, a 17-year-old girl from Domremy stood in the great hall of Chinon Castle, barefoot, hair cropped short beneath a page boy's cap, surrounded by armored lords who smelled of wine and suspicion. Jeanne d'Arc, Joan as history would call her, had traveled 300 miles through enemy territory, with nothing but a borrowed sword and a voice in her head that claimed to speak for saints. The Dauphin, Charles, heir to a throne he did not yet possess, had hidden among his courtiers to test her. She walked straight to him, knelt, and said, "Gentle prince, I am sent to crown you at Rheims." No hesitation, no plea for belief, just a single sentence delivered in the quiet tone one might use to announce supper. The room fell silent. A bishop later wrote that the candles themselves seemed to burn straighter. Charles, who had spent years paralyzed by indecision, felt something settle in his chest like a stone finally finding bottom. Within weeks, he gave Joan command of an army. Within months, he wore the crown. The girl who decided in a moment what councils had debated for a decade changed the course of a nation not with strategy but with the unshakable clarity of a decision made at the still point. That still point is the fifth current of calm dominance, the inner pivot where fear, data, and desire collapse into a single luminous yes or no. Neuroscientists located in the momentary synchronization of the default mode network and the executive control network, a fleeting state where wandering imagination and focused intention dance in perfect step. Mystics call it the eternal now. Decision theorists measure it in reduced latency between stimulus and action in high-stakes environments. Whatever the name, it is the moment when the future leans in to listen. I once watched this pivot unfold in a neonatal intensive care unit in Cape Town. A premature infant, 600 grams, translucent skin, lungs too fragile for the world, coded at 3:17 a.m. Alarms screamed. The resident froze, hands hovering over the tiny chest. The attending neonatologist, Dr. Nia Mbeki, entered without running. She placed 2 fingers on the baby's sternum, closed her eyes for 1 full second, and said, "Pause the bagging. Let me feel." The room obeyed. In that second, Dr. Mbeki wasn't calculating odds or reciting protocols. She was listening to a rhythm older than medicine. Then, resume at 40 breaths. Prepare 1 milliliter of epinephrine, half dose. The baby's heart restarted on the 3rd compression. Later, the resident asked how she knew. Dr. Mbeki shrugged. "I waited until the noise stopped telling me what to do, and the silence told me what was true." The child, now 7, calls her Auntie Nia and sends crayon drawings of sunflowers every birthday. The still point is not the absence of information, it is the transcendence of overload. The human brain processes 11 million bits of data per second, but conscious awareness handles only 40. Most decisions drown in the gap. Calm dominance trains the mind to surf that gap instead of sinking in it. In a study at the Max Planck Institute, elite chess players were hooked to EEGs during blitz games. At the exact moment they moved a piece that led to checkmate, their brains showed a micro spike in theta waves, followed by a profound drop in beta, the signature of intuitive certainty. Grandmasters don't see more moves. They see the one move that renders all others irrelevant. The still point is the Grandmaster's secret, available to anyone willing to court silence. Let us journey to the deck of a Polynesian voyaging canoe in 1976. The Hokulea, a double-hulled replica of ancient vessels, sailed from Hawaii to Tahiti using no instruments, only stars, waves, and the body's felt sense of direction. The navigator, Piers Maubialug, a master from the Caroline Islands, stood at the stern with his eyes closed, one hand trailing in the water. Crew members whispered about storms on the horizon. Pialuk opened his eyes and said, "We turn south-southwest now." No debate. The helmsman adjusted course. 34 days later, they sighted Tahiti at dawn, exactly where Pialuk predicted. When asked how he decided, he touched his chest and said, "The ocean speaks here first, then here." He pointed to his head. The still point is the moment the body votes and the mind ratifies. Most of us make decisions like drunks in a funhouse, lurching from mirror to mirror, each reflection more distorted than the last. We poll friends, refresh dashboards, spiral into worst-case scenarios. The still point asks us to step out of the funhouse and stand in the dark until our eyes adjust. I knew a venture capitalist in London named Priya, who funded unicorns by refusing to fund anything until she could summarize the opportunity in one sentence that made her stomach flutter. "If it doesn't live in my body," she told me, "it doesn't live in my portfolio." In 2019, she passed on a fintech darling everyone else chased. Her sentence: "It solves a problem no one will admit they have." The company imploded 18 months later in a fraud scandal. That same year, she wrote a term sheet in a cafe for a startup whose pitch was a single post-it note: "We make grandmothers feel safe online." The flutter was unmistakable. The company now protects 200 million elders from scams. Priya's secret: before every meeting she spends 5 minutes in the stairwell doing alternate nostril breathing until her heartbeat slows to 60 beats per minute. Clarity, she says, rides a slow pulse. The still point has 3 chambers: discernment, detachment, and devotion. Discernment is the blade that cuts away noise. Detachment is the space that lets the blade fall true. Devotion is the gravity that pulls the decision into alignment with something larger than ego. Miss any chamber and the pivot wobbles. Let us enter the first chamber with a samurai named Tsukahara Bokuden in 16th century Japan. Bokuden was challenged to a duel by a brash young ronin who had never lost. On the appointed morning they met on a small island in a lake, reachable only by ferry. The ronin leapt aboard, sword drawn, demanding they shove off immediately. Bokuden stepped onto the boat last, untied the mooring rope, and instead of drawing his blade, began to pole the ferry toward the center of the lake. The ronin raged, lunged, then realized they were drifting far from shore. Bokuden shipped the pole, sat and said, "This is the battlefield. Draw." The ronin, panicked, flailed at empty air. Bokuden tapped him once on the wrist with the pole. The sword sank. Discernment, Bokuden later told his students, is knowing the island was never the ground beneath your feet. He returned the ronin's blade with a bow and a ferry ride home. The young man became his most devoted disciple. Discernment begins with subtraction. The average executive receives 120 emails daily, attends 5 meetings, and toggles between 17 apps. Each input is a pebble in the shoe of clarity. The still point demands we remove pebbles until the foot remembers its own shape. I once spent a weekend with a Benedictine monk in Vermont who made decisions for a community of 30 souls using a single question. Does this enlarge life or diminish it? He applied it to everything, whether to buy a new tractor, whether to admit a troubled postulant, whether to serve soup or stew on Tuesday. The monastery's finances were solvent, its orchards legendary, its novices serene. When I asked how he avoided overthinking, he smiled. I subtract until only the question remains. Then I wait for the answer to feel like breathing. The second chamber, detachment, is the hardest for modern minds. We mistake attachment for passion, certainty for wisdom. Detachment is not indifference. It is the willingness to hold the decision lightly enough that truth can land. In 1944, Dietrich Bonhoeffer sat in a Gestapo prison, drafting letters that would become theology for a post-war world. Facing execution, he wrote to his friend Eberhard, "I have come to accept that I may die without seeing the fruit of my work. This frees me to do it well." His decision to resist Hitler was not fueled by outcome but by alignment. The still point is the prison cell where detachment and devotion kiss. I knew a climate scientist in Oslo named Lars who embodied this chamber. His models predicted catastrophic Arctic melt by 2040. Governments ignored him. Activists wanted him to exaggerate. Lars refused both. Instead, he spent a year sailing the fjords with indigenous Sami reindeer herders, learning how ice speaks through hoofprints. One night, camped on a glacier, he asked an elder what to do with data no one wanted. The elder pointed to the aurora borealis. The sky doesn't argue with the mountain, it simply shows what is. Lars returned to Oslo, published his findings without adjectives, and attached a single photograph. A reindeer standing on grass, where ice had been for 10,000 years. The image went viral. Policy shifted within a year. Lars never celebrated. "I just stopped clutching the outcome," he told me. The ice did the rest. The third chamber, devotion, is the fire that warms without consuming. It is the decision rooted not in ego's hunger but in service to something unbreakable. In 1986, a Chilean economist named Manfred Max Neef was exiled for opposing Pinochet. From a tiny apartment in Sweden, he wrote a book proposing barefoot economics. Development measured not by GDP, but by how well a community meets 9 human needs: subsistence, protection, affection, understanding, participation, leisure, creation, identity, freedom. Publishers laughed. Max Neef mailed the manuscript to a nun in Santiago who ran a soup kitchen. She photocopied it, distributed it to shanty towns. Within a decade, barefoot economics shaped policy in Brazil, South Africa, Canada. Max Neef never returned to Chile until democracy did. When asked why he never despaired, he said, "I decided for the children who would never meet me. That was enough." Devotion is the still point's North Star. The chambers are not sequential, they are simultaneous. Discernment without detachment becomes obsession. Detachment without devotion becomes drift. Devotion without discernment becomes fanaticism. The still point is the crucible where all three melt into one. Let us return to Joan in Chinon Castle. Her discernment came from years of listening to voices no one else heard. Her detachment was the certainty that death was not the worst outcome. Her devotion was the crowned king she had never met but already served. The decision took one sentence, but it was forged in a lifetime of stillness. Modern life conspires against the still point. We are addicted to motion, scrolling, hustling, optimizing. The antidote is deliberate pause. I knew a Japanese calligrapher in Kyoto who began every stroke by bowing to the blank page for 7 breaths. "The paper teaches me what to write," she said. Her characters were so alive that museums displayed the empty sheets beside the inked ones. The pause is the blank page of decision-making. Here is a practice to carry into the next crossroads. Call it the three-chamber breath. When faced with a decision large or small, find a threshold, a doorway, a sidewalk crack, the space between two subway cars. Stand with one foot on either side. Close your eyes. Inhale for 4 counts, asking, what is essential here? Discernment. Hold for 4, asking, can I release the outcome? Detachment. Exhale for 4, asking, what serves the whole? Devotion. Step across with the answer that arrives on the exhale. A single mother in Manila used this to decide whether to leave an abusive husband. On the threshold of her sister's doorway, the exhale brought, my children's peace. She left with nothing but a backpack and her daughter's hands. Today she runs a shelter for women who once stood where she did. The threshold is sacred because it is where the still point touches earth. The still point scales. In 2008, a trader named Sarah in Manhattan faced a screen flashing red as Lehman Brothers collapsed. Her fund was down 40% in a day. Colleagues screamed into phones. Sarah stepped into the stairwell, did the three-chamber breath, and returned with a single instruction: sell everything except the municipal bonds. The fund survived. Her boss called it genius. Sarah called it breathing. The still point is democratic. It asks only for lungs and courage. Let us end in a garden in ancient Persia, where a Sufi master named Rabia was asked by a disciple how to know God's will. Rabia picked up a pebble, held it to the sun, and said, when the light passes through without distortion, the stone is ready. She dropped it into a fountain. Ripples spread, stilled, spread again. Decisions are pebbles, she said. The still point is the water that lets the light through. The disciple sat by the fountain for 40 days. On the 40th, he stood and walked into the desert without provisions. Search parties found him weeks later, alive, radiant. I decided to trust the light, he said. The desert decided the rest. In the next chapter, we'll follow the ripples of the still point into the art of boundaries, how calm dominance says no so cleanly that the world says thank you. For now, carry the three-chamber breath into the next choice, the next crisis, the next ordinary moment waiting to be crowned by clarity. The future is not a problem to solve. It is a garden to enter one still step at a time. Chapter 6. The Silk Wall, Setting Boundaries That Protect Without Pushing Away. In the autumn of 221 BCE, the first emperor of China, Qin Shi Huang, stood atop the newly joined sections of the Great Wall and watched 1,000 laborers hammer stones into place under a sky the color of iron. The wall was not yet the serpent of brick and legend. It was a raw scar across the mountains, built to keep out the northern horsemen who raided like wind. A general approached with news of a Xiongnu chieftain demanding tribute or war. The emperor, barely 30, listened without turning from the view. When the general finished, Qin asked one question. Does the wall speak for itself? The general blinked. Qin gestured to the stones. Then let it. He sent no gold, no emissaries, only a single rider carrying a silk banner embroidered with a single character, Jia, boundary. The chieftain received the banner, studied the wall through spies, and turned his horses north. For 15 years, the raids ceased. The wall had not fired an arrow, yet it had drawn a line in the earth so clear that even the wind respected it. Qin's silk wall was not stone. It was the quiet certainty that some lines, once drawn, need no defense. That certainty is the sixth current of calm dominance, the silk wall. It is the boundary that protects sovereignty without declaring war on connection. Psychologists measure it in stable autonomic arousal paired with high interpersonal warmth. Heart steady, voice soft, eyes open. Attachment theorists see it in secure base behavior, the ability to say this far while keeping the gate unbarred for those who honor the line. The silk wall is not a fortress, it is a membrane. Permeable to love, impermeable to violation. I first felt the silk wall in a kindergarten classroom in Reykjavik. The teacher, Elin, greeted 24 5-year-olds every morning by kneeling at the door and tracing an invisible line across the threshold with her finger. "Inside this line," she would say, "we keep our bodies safe and our words kind." Then she stepped over, inviting each child to do the same. One February morning, a boy named Aaron arrived furious. His mother had forgotten his gloves, and his hands were red with cold. He stomped across the line, shoved a girl, and sent blocks flying. The room froze. Elin did not raise her voice. She walked to the threshold, retraced the invisible line, and said, "Aaron, your anger is welcome. Your shoving is not. Step back, take 3 breaths, and cross again when you're ready to keep our bodies safe." Aaron glared, tears freezing on his cheeks. Elin waited, palms open at her sides. 10 seconds, 20. Aaron took one shaky breath, then another. On the third, he stepped back, wiped his nose on his sleeve, and crossed the line slowly. The girl he shoved handed him a block. By recess, they were building a dragon together. Elin never sent a note home, never called a meeting. The silk wall had spoken, and a 5-year-old had learned that feelings cross freely, but harm does not. The silk wall has 3 threads: clarity, container, and compassion. Clarity is the line itself, precise, visible, spoken once. Container is the space on either side, room for the other to feel without being flooded. Compassion is the silk, soft enough to touch, strong enough to hold. Miss any thread, and the boundary frays into rigidity or collapse. Let us enter the first thread with a Maasai elder named Naserian in the Ngorongoro crater. Every dry season, tourist jeeps encroached on the grazing lands, scattering cattle and stressing the herds. Rangers pleaded, fines were ignored. Naserian, 82, walked to the busiest safari track at dawn carrying a beaded staff and a calabash of milk. She drew a line in the dust with the staff, poured a thin stream of milk along it, and sat. The first jeep roared up, driver grinning for photos. Naserian raised one hand, palm forward, and said in Swahili, "Beyond this milk, the grass is for cows, not cameras." The driver laughed until he noticed the line of warriors behind her, silent, spears grounded. He reversed, word spread. By noon, every jeep detoured. Naserian never shouted, never threatened. Clarity had poured the boundary in milk, and the earth itself enforced it. Clarity begins with language stripped of apology. The average person softens boundaries with maybe, if it's okay, I hate to ask. The silk wall uses declarative verbs and sensory anchors. I knew a graphic designer in Lisbon named Mateo, who lived above a nightclub that blasted fado remixes until 4 a.m. sleep-deprived. He knocked on the owner's door at noon with a bottle of Vinho Verde and said, "The music stops at midnight starting tonight, or I call the police every hour until it does. No pleas, no threat of friendship lost." The owner, expecting negotiation, blinked. Mateo placed the bottle on the bar and left. That night, the speakers went silent at 11:58. The owner sent up a plate of bifana as thanks. Clarity had drawn the line. The Vinho Verde was the silk. The second thread, container, is the art of holding space for the storm without becoming it. In a hostage negotiation training in Quantico, instructors teach recruits to use boundary bracketing. When a barricaded subject screams, "I'll kill them all," the negotiator responds, "I hear you want to be in control. Let's talk about how we keep everyone breathing." The boundary is acknowledged, control, the container offered, breathing, the threat neither amplified nor ignored. In real crises, this lowers cortisol in both parties by up to 30% within minutes. The silk wall is the negotiator's calm body, the bracket around chaos. I once watched Container save a family dinner in Palermo. Nonna Rosa, 91, presided over a table of 30 descendants. Her grandson Luca arrived late, drunk, and began mocking his cousin's new fiancée. Plates clattered. Nonna Rosa did not stand or scold. She simply placed her fork down, looked at Luca, and said, "In this house we tease with love, or we leave with silence. Choose." The table held its breath. Luca's eyes filled. He pushed back his chair, walked to the balcony, and stood there for 7 minutes. When he returned, he kissed his cousin's cheek and asked the fiancée about her hometown. Nonna Rosa passed him the eggplant parmigiana without comment. The container had held the storm. Compassion had guided it to shore. The third thread, compassion, is the silk that prevents the wall from becoming a cage. Without it, boundaries calcify into resentment. With it, they become invitations to growth. In a women's prison in Oslo, a program called Restorative Circles brings inmates and victims face to face. One session paired a burglar named Ingrid with the elderly couple she had robbed. The husband trembled with rage. The facilitator, a former inmate herself, drew an imaginary circle on the floor with her finger and said, "Inside this circle we speak truth. Outside it we carry what we learn. Ingrid, you begin." Ingrid described her addiction, her terror, the moment she realized the couple's wedding photo was older than she was. The wife wept, the husband's fists unclenched. When Ingrid finished, the facilitator asked, "What do you need to cross back over the line hole?" Ingrid whispered, "To know they sleep without fear." The husband reached into his pocket, pulled out the key to their home, and placed it in the center of the circle. "We changed the locks," he said. "This key opens nothing now, but it opens this." He gestured to his chest. Ingrid picked it up, held it to her heart, and nodded. She left prison 2 years later, and now facilitates circles herself. The silk wall had transformed a crime into a bridge. The silk wall scales from the personal to the planetary. In 1989, the Berlin Wall was concrete and barbed wire. When it fell, people danced on the rubble, but the real boundary work happened in living rooms. East Germans invited West German strangers for coffee. West Germans brought groceries without pity. No speeches, just shared tables. The silk wall was the cup passed hand to hand, the silence after Willkommen that needed no translation. Within a year, the psychological divide had thinned more than any bulldozer could achieve. Modern life erodes boundaries with the solvent of availability. We answer emails at 11 p.m., accept quick calls that steal hours, say yes to protect feelings we barely know. The silk wall restores sovereignty, one refusal at a time. I knew a surgeon in Mumbai named Dr. Patel, who operated 16 hours a day until his daughter stopped recognizing him at school pickup. He instituted a red thread rule. Every Friday from 6 p.m. to Monday 6 a.m., his phone lived in a red envelope in his office drawer. Colleagues panicked. What if there's an emergency? Dr. Patel trained his residents to handle 99% of cases and promised to return within 30 minutes if the envelope was opened. In 3 years, the envelope was opened twice. His daughter now waits at the gate with a drawing every Friday. The red thread had drawn the line. Love had woven the silk. The silk wall is not built in a day, but in 1,000 micro-moments. Begin with the body, because the body is the first boundary. The next time you feel the familiar clutch of overcommitment, tight jaw, shallow breath, the urge to people please, pause and inventory 3 sensations: the weight of your sit bones, the temperature of your exhale, the exact point where your tongue touches your palate. Name them silently. This grounds you in the only territory you truly govern. Then let's speak your boundary in 1 sentence, beginning with "I choose." I choose to end this meeting at 3 p.m. I choose to take calls only between 10 and 12. I choose to walk away from this conversation if voices rise. The "I choose" is the silk. The specificity is the wall. Let us end with a practice to carry across every threshold. Call it the milk line. Before entering any space, office, home, Zoom call, pause for one heartbeat, and imagine pouring a thin stream of milk along the doorway. See it shimmer, smell its sweetness, silently name one non-negotiable. My time is honored here. My body is safe here. My truth is spoken here. Step over the line, carrying that intention like a lantern. A barista in Seattle used this to tell her boss she would no longer cover closing shifts alone. She poured the imaginary milk, stepped over, and said, "I choose to leave at 10 p.m. with another staff member or not at all." The boss grumbled, then hired a second closer. The barista now sleeps 8 hours and still makes lattes that win awards. The milk line had spoken, and the world adjusted. In the next chapter, we'll follow the silk wall into the realm of energy. How calm dominance radiates a field that reorganizes chaos without lifting a finger. For now, pour your milk line at the next doorway, the next conversation, the next ordinary moment waiting to be protected by tenderness. The world is full of storms, but the silk wall teaches that safety is not the absence of wind, it is the presence of a line the wind learns to respect. Chapter 7. The Quiet Sun Radiating Energy that rearranges the room without a word. In the summer of 1271, a Venetian merchant named Niccolo Polo stood with his teenage son Marco in the vast audience hall of Kublai Khan's palace in Xanadu, a hall so large that swallows nested in the rafters and their wings cast shadows on the marble floor. The Khan, seated on a throne of carved jade, had summoned the foreigners to explain the Christian God. Niccolo began a rehearsed speech about Bethlehem and crucifixion, but his voice cracked with fatigue after the long journey across the steppe. Marco, 17, jet-lagged by centuries, stepped forward unbidden. He said nothing. Instead, he reached into his satchel, pulled out a single glass vial of Venetian olive oil, uncorked it, and let one drop fall onto the polished floor. The oil spread into a perfect golden circle that caught the torchlight and held it like a tiny sun. The Khan leaned forward. Courtiers ceased whispering. Even the swallows quieted. Marco waited until the circle stopped expanding, then spoke in halting Mongol. "This is how light travels when nothing blocks it." He corked the vial, bowed, and stepped back. The Khan did not ask another theological question. Instead, he ordered the Polos to stay as guests for 17 years. Chroniclers later wrote that the drop of oil converted no one, yet every minister who entered the hall that day walked more softly, as though the floor itself had become sacred. The quiet sun had risen in a teenager's palm, and an empire adjusted its orbit. That sun is the seventh current of calm dominance, the quiet radiation of energy that reorganizes space without announcement. Physicists measure it in micro-Tesla fluctuations in the cardiac field. Empaths feel it as the sudden softening of a stranger's shoulders. Spiritual traditions call it baraka, shekinah, mana. The quiet sun is not charisma. It does not perform. It is presence so coherent that the environment entrains to its frequency, the way iron filings align around a magnet no one sees. I first met the quiet sun in a hospice room in Galway. The patient, Seamus, 93, had refused morphine for 3 days, claiming the pain kept him honest. Nurses tiptoed. Family wept in the corridor. Then Sister Bridget entered, a nun of indeterminate age who carried no rosary, only a small tin of clove oil. She sat beside Seamus, dipped her finger in the oil, and traced a slow circle on the inside of his wrist. She hummed no hymn, spoke no prayer. After 90 seconds, Seamus's breathing deepened. His daughter, watching from the doorway, felt her own chest expand in mirror rhythm. By the time Sister Bridget left, Seamus was asleep, the morphine untouched. The charge nurse later checked the heart rate monitor. Seamus's variability had shifted from jagged spikes to gentle waves, and every staff member in the corridor showed the same pattern for the next hour. Sister Bridget, when asked, only smiled. "Clove remembers the tree," she said. "The body remembers the sun." The quiet sun has three rays: coherence, calibration, and contagion. Coherence is the inner alignment of heart, breath, and intention. Calibration is the micro-adjustment to the room's emotional temperature. Contagion is the invisible spread that happens when coherence meets calibration in open space. Miss any ray, and the light diffuses into noise. Let us follow the first ray into a neuroscience lab in Kyoto, where Dr. Sato studies cardiac entrainment in pairs. She seats strangers 3 meters apart, no talking, and measures their heart fields with magnetometers sensitive enough to detect a heartbeat through concrete. In pairs where one partner has practiced coherence training, slow breathing, positive recall, the second partner's field begins to synchronize within 4 minutes. The effect is strongest when the coherent partner maintains a gentle smile and relaxed eyelids. Dr. Sato's favorite subject is a retired sumo wrestler named Takeshi, who lost both legs to diabetes. Takeshi sits in his wheelchair, places a hand on his chest, and recalls the moment his daughter was born. Within 2 minutes, the stranger opposite him, often a stressed university student, shows theta wave bursts identical to deep meditation. Takeshi never speaks. Words are extra, he says. The heart is enough. Coherence is cultivated, not conjured. The heart generates an electromagnetic field 60 times stronger than the brain's and up to 5 meters in radius. When that field is chaotic, rushed breath, scattered thoughts, it broadcasts static. When it is coherent, it broadcasts a signal the nervous system recognizes as home. I knew a subway conductor in Mexico City named Luz who ran the Linear 2 through rush hours that felt like war zones. Passengers shoved, pickpockets thrived, announcements blared. Luz began each shift with a 2-minute coherence practice in the cab. Eyes closed, hand on heart, recalling the smell of her abuela's tortillas. Then she opened the doors. Commuters who boarded her train reported feeling inexplicably calmer, even on days when delays tripled. Crime on Luz's route dropped 28% in a year. The transit authority installed cameras to study her technique. They found nothing but a woman smiling softly at the controls. The quiet sun had turned a metal tube into a moving sanctuary. The second ray, calibration, is the art of matching the room's frequency without merging with it. In a hostage crisis in Manila, negotiator Captain Reyes entered a bank where a gunman held 12 tellers. The air was thick with terror, sobbing, sweat, the metallic click of a reloaded pistol. Reyes did not rush to empathize or command. He stood just inside the door, closed his eyes for 3 seconds, and matched his breathing to the slowest exhale he could hear, a teller hyperventilating at half speed. Then he spoke at that exact cadence. "I see you want everyone to leave alive." The gunman's shoulders dropped a fraction. Reyes calibrated again, this time to the gunman's blink rate, once every 4 seconds. "Let's start with water for the tellers." The gunman nodded. 6 hours later, all hostages walked out. Reyes never raised his voice above a murmur. Calibration had turned a standoff into a duet. Calibration requires the body to become a tuning fork. I knew a jazz pianist in New Orleans named Delphine who played every gig with a pre-show ritual. She stood backstage, pressed her forehead to the cool brick wall, and counted the heartbeat of the crowd through the floorboards. If the pulse was frantic, post-Mardi Gras frenzy, she opened with a slow blues in 6/8. If it was sluggish, Sunday brunch, she ignited with second-line struts. Audiences swore she read minds. Delphine laughed. "I read feet," she said. "The body votes before the mouth does." Her tip jar overflowed not because she played louder, but because she played truer. The quiet sun calibrates by listening with the skin. The third ray, contagion, is the moment coherence and calibration leap the gap. In a study at the University of Wisconsin, researchers placed 3 strangers in a room with no task. One had been trained in coherence, the others had not. After 10 minutes, All three showed identical heart rate variability patterns, reduced cortisol, and increased oxytocin. The trained subject never spoke, never touched anyone. Contagion had traveled through the air like birdsong. The quiet sun does not persuade, it permeates. I once witnessed contagion rewrite a corporate retreat in the Scottish Highlands. The CEO, Malcolm, had gathered 50 executives for team building that felt more like a purge. Day one ended in shouting matches over market share. That night, the facilitator, a soft-spoken Inuit elder named Isla, invited everyone to the lodge fireplace. She said nothing for the first 5 minutes, only fed the flames with pine cones that crackled like gossip. Then she began to tap a small sealskin drum at 60 beats per minute, the resting heart rate of a sleeping child. No instructions, executives shifted, checked phones, coughed. Isla kept drumming. At minute 7, the first phone was pocketed. At minute 12, shoulders dropped in unison. By minute 20, the room breathed as one organism. Malcolm, who had planned a dawn hike to crush weakness, found himself weeping silently into his whiskey. The next morning he cancelled the hike and asked each executive to share one fear. The company's stock rose 15% in the following quarter, not because strategy changed, but because trust had. Ayla's drum had carried the quiet sun across 50 skeptical hearts. The quiet sun is not reserved for saints or shamans. It is democratic, available to anyone willing to slow the inner weather. Begin with coherence, 3 times daily. Sit for 2 minutes with eyes closed, hand on heart, recalling a moment you felt completely safe. Let the memory flood the body. Smell, texture, temperature. Notice the heart's rhythm soften. This is the forge where the sun is kindled. Then practice calibration in micro moments. The next time you enter a tense room, family dinner, client pitch, hospital corridor, pause at the threshold and match one observable rhythm. The blink of the angriest person, the foot tap of the most anxious, the breath of the quietest. Mirror it for 3 cycles, then soften by 10%. You are not mimicking, you are tuning. Watch the room exhale with you. Finally, trust contagion. Speak less, radiate more. I knew a librarian in Lagos named Fatima who transformed a chaotic children's reading hour into a cathedral of focus. She began each session by standing in the center of the rug, closing her eyes and breathing audibly through her nose for 6 counts. 30 toddlers squirmed, giggled, threw books. Fatima kept breathing. By count 20, the first child sat. By count 40, 30 small bodies breathed in unison. Fatima opened her eyes, smiled, and began the story. No shushing, no threats. The quiet sun had done the herding. The quiet sun has limits. It cannot force, only invite. In a maximum security prison in South Africa, a warden named Thabo tried to use coherence to calm a rioting bloc. He stood in the yard, hand on heart, recalling his grandmother's lullabies. Inmates pelted him with urine-soaked towels. Thabo retreated, bloodied, but unbroken. Later, he realized his error. He had radiated into a field already saturated with terror. The quiet sun needs a crack of openness to enter. Thabo found the crack months later in a single inmate who asked for a book. Thabo brought it personally, stood outside the cell, and breathed with the man through the bars for 2 minutes. The inmate's grip on the bars loosened. Within a year, that inmate started a prison library. The sun had found its aperture. NASA. The quiet sun scales to cities. In 2011, Medellin, Colombia, was the murder capital of the world. A new mayor, Anibal, installed outdoor escalators in the slums, not for efficiency, but to give residents a moment of elevation where the city looked different. He rode the first escalator at dawn, stood at the top, and simply looked out over the valley for 5 minutes. Commuters joined him, then residents, then tourists. No speeches. The view, held in shared silence, became a daily coherence practice for thousands. Homicide rates dropped 80% in a decade. The escalators were the aperture, the quiet sun was the view. Let us end with a practice to carry into every room. Call it the golden drop. Before entering any space, classroom, boardroom, bedroom, pause and imagine a single drop of golden oil falling from your heart to the floor. See it spread into a perfect circle, 3 meters wide, shimmering. Step into the circle and feel it travel with you, a portable sun. Silently intend, may coherence find coherence. Then enter. A barista in Melbourne used this to serve coffee during lockdown. Customers, masked and miserable, ordered through plexiglass. She paused, dropped the golden oil in her mind, and smiled with her eyes. Tips tripled. One customer left a note. Your smile remembered my mother. The quiet sun had crossed plastic and pandemic, and in the next chapter, we'll follow the quiet sun into the art of legacy, how calm dominance plants seeds that outlive the hand that sows them. For now, carry your golden drop into the next room, the next silence, the next ordinary moment, waiting to be lit from within. The world is dark, but the quiet sun teaches that light is not the absence of shadow. It is the presence of a heart that remembers how to shine. Chapter 8, The Long Echo, Crafting a Legacy That Whispers Centuries After You're Gone. In the year 1174, a stonemason named Salim stood on the dusty banks of the Yamuna River in northern India, watching a red sandstone slab slide into place under the orders of a sultan he would never meet. The slab was one of thousands destined for a tomb the sultan was building for his beloved wife, Mumtaz Mahal, who had died in childbirth 2 years earlier. Salim's task was humble: carve a single lotus petal on a pillar that would be hidden behind a screen. No one would ever see his name. The sultan had promised glory to architects, poets, calligraphers, but the masons were paid by the day and forgotten by nightfall. Yet Salim worked as though the petal were the only flower in existence. He spent 3 weeks shaping its curve, polishing the veins until moonlight danced along them like water. When the pillar was finally raised, Salim pressed his forehead to the cool stone and whispered, "Grow, little lotus, long after my bones are dust." 450 years later, a Mughal princess visiting the completed Taj Mahal paused before that very pillar, hidden though it was, and felt an inexplicable urge to pray. She ordered fresh lotuses placed at its base every dawn, a tradition that continues today, tended by gardeners who have no idea why. Salim's petal had become a long echo, a legacy that outlived empires by refusing to announce itself. That echo is the 8th current of calm dominance, the long echo, the deliberate planting of seeds whose fruit ripens in hands you will never shake. Historians trace it in artifacts that carry intention across millennia. Neuroeconomists model it in intergenerational trust games, where one player's generosity boosts cooperation 7 generations later. Poets call it the immortality of the unnoticed act. The long echo is not fame, it is resonance that travels through time on the frequency of integrity. I first heard the long echo in a fishing village on the coast of Newfoundland. The cod were gone, the cannery shuttered, the young people fled to Alberta oil fields. Old Thomas, 87, spent every morning on the wharf, mending nets no one would use. He worked with the same deliberate knots his grandfather had taught him in 1943, humming a sea shanty in Gaelic. Tourists assumed he was quaint. Then one dawn, a boy from Toronto, sent to stay with relatives after his parents' divorce, wandered down to watch. Thomas handed him a shuttle and said, "Hold this like you're holding tomorrow." The boy learned one knot, then another. By summer's end, he could mend faster than Thomas. When the boy returned to the city, he taught the knots to his scout troop. 20 years later, a Coast Guard cutter off Nova Scotia rescued a capsized kayak using a net mended with Thomas's knots. The rescuer was the boy, now a lieutenant, who still hummed the Gaelic shanty under his breath. Thomas had died a decade earlier, but his hands had saved a life he would never know. The long echo has three waves: intention, transmission, and surrender. Intention is the seed chosen with care. Transmission is the soil prepared without attachment to harvest. Surrender is the release that lets time do the watering. Miss any wave, and the echo fades into noise. Let us ride the first wave into a scriptorium in 9th century Ireland, where a monk named Coleman copied the Gospel of John by candlelight. Parchment was scarce, ink precious, margins forbidden, yet Coleman on the final page drew a tiny cat chasing a mouse in the corner, a doodle no abbot would see. He captioned it in Ogham script, Pangor Ban, my white cat keeps me company. 9 centuries later, the manuscript surfaced in an Austrian monastery. A scholar translating the marginalia laughed aloud at the cat, then wept. The doodle humanized a sacred text, reminding readers that faith once lived alongside whiskers and mischief. Today, Pangor Ban is the mascot of Dublin's Trinity College Library, printed on tote bags and bookmarks. Coleman's intention, a moment of joy in toil, had echoed through a millennium. Intention is the quiet sun turned outward across time. It asks, what do I wish to amplify in the world long after my voice is silent? I knew a pediatric nurse in Nairobi named Wanjiku who answered this question every shift. She kept a stack of blank postcards in her pocket. When a child left the ward, cured or carried out in a parent's arms, she wrote a single sentence on a card and slipped it into the chart. You were brave today. Years later, a young man returned to the hospital seeking the nurse who had saved him from meningitis at age 4. He carried the postcard, now laminated, edges soft from handling. This sentence taught me I could survive anything, he said. Wanjiku had retired, but her postcards lived in wallets across Kenya, a constellation of intention. The second wave, transmission, is the art of embedding the seed in living soil. In 1438, Johannes Gutenberg was a failed metalsmith drowning in debt. He pawned his tools to fund a secret project. Movable type. Printers existed, but their wooden blocks wore out after 100 pages. Gutenberg's innovation was an alloy of lead, tin, and antimony that could be recast infinitely. He told no one the formula, only that it must be hard enough to hold the letter, soft enough to release it. He taught the alloy to his apprentice, Peter Schoffer, who taught it to his son, who taught it to a journeyman in Venice. By 1500, the alloy was standard across Europe, though Gutenberg's name was barely known. The Gutenberg Bible was printed with it. But so were pamphlets that toppled kings. Transmission had carried the seed through generations of hands that never met the sower. Transmission requires mentors who refuse to hoard. I knew a chef in Lyon named Madame Claire, who ran a 3-Michelin-star kitchen with the ferocity of a general and the heart of a grandmother. Every apprentice who lasted 6 months left with her sauce notebook, a leather-bound tome of recipes annotated in her spidery handwriting. She never published it, never sold it. The sauce must travel, she said. One apprentice, Marco, opened a food truck in Marseille, serving her bouillabaisse from a handwritten page. A tech billionaire tasted it, invested, and Marco now feeds thousands daily in pop-up kitchens worldwide. Madame Claire died at 98, still stirring pots. Her notebook lives in 30 languages, the sauce evolving with every hand that stirs it. Transmission is the long echo's relay race. The third wave, surrender, is the release of the seed to forces beyond control. In 1963, a Quaker activist named Bayard Rustin organized the March on Washington, orchestrating 250,000 people with nothing but mimeographed maps and payphones. He was gay, black, and a former communist, 3 strikes that kept him off the podium. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered the "I Have a Dream" speech, but Rustin staged the dream. When thanked, he waved it away. I just set the table. History eats the meal. He died in 1987, nearly forgotten. In 2013, President Obama awarded him the Presidential Medal of Freedom posthumously. Rustin's Surrender had let the echo find its own volume. Surrender is the hardest wave for modern minds addicted to metrics. We want dashboards, likes, legacy statements. The long echo asks us to plant and walk away. I knew a school principal in rural Alabama named Mr. Leroy, who spent 30 years turning a failing elementary into a garden of learning. He planted pecan trees along the driveway, one for every graduating class. By the time these shade the buses, he told the kindergartners, you'll be bringing your own kids here. He retired in 1998. The trees were saplings. In 2023, a former student, now a neurosurgeon, returned for her daughter's first day and parked beneath a canopy so thick the asphalt stayed cool in August. She found Mr. Leroy's name on a small plaque beneath the oldest tree, half hidden by moss. She took a photo, posted it online, and the pecan grove went viral as the school that grows doctors. Mr. Leroy, 92, living in a nursing home, never saw the post. His surrender had let the shade find its own story. The waves are not linear, they are tidal. Intention flows into transmission, transmission into surrender, surrender back into intention. The long echo is a spiral, not a line. Let us return to Salim at the Taj Mahal. His intention was the perfect petal. His transmission was the care that taught apprentices to polish stone as though it was skin. His surrender was the whisper to the lotus, trusting moonlight to carry the prayer. The spiral turned for centuries. Modern life shrinks legacy to personal brand. We curate feeds, chase virality, measure impact in quarterly reports. The long echo invites us to zoom out until our lifetime is a single breath in a conversation that began before language. Begin with intention. Once a year, on your birthday, write a letter to a child born today. Tell them one truth you wish you had known at their age. Seal it, date it for their 18th birthday, and give it to a trusted friend with instructions. My friend Eleanor in Barcelona has a drawer of such letters. In 2041, a girl she will never meet will open one that says, "Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision that something else matters more." The long echo begins with ink and trust. Then practice transmission in daily acts. Mentor without credit. Share the recipe, the code, the shortcut. I knew a coder in Bangalore named Arjun who open-sourced an algorithm that optimized insulin delivery for diabetics. He refused patents, posted it on GitHub with a note, "Use, improve, pass on." Within a year, a teenager in rural Iowa adapted it for her father's pump. The father lived to walk her down the aisle. Arjun never knew transmission had done its work. Finally, cultivate surrender by planting where you cannot harvest. In 1982, a Japanese man named Masanobu Fukuoka stopped plowing his rice fields and began scattering seed balls, clay pellets mixed with seeds and compost. He called it do-nothing farming. Critics predicted famine. Instead, his yields matched chemical farms while the soil regenerated. Fukuoka died in 2008. Today, seed balls reforest deserts in Kenya, feed orphans in Haiti, and grow tomatoes on Brooklyn rooftops. Fukuoka never traveled to see them. Surrender had let the earth do the farming. The long echo scales to civilizations. In 1859, a British naturalist named Charles Darwin published a book that began as a letter to a friend. He delayed publication for 20 years, refining, doubting, surrendering to the truth that species evolve. The Origin of Species sold out its first printing in a day, but Darwin spent his life answering letters from farmers, priests, children. He died in 1882. Unsure if his ideas would endure. Today, every vaccine, every crop yield, every conservation plan carries his echo. Darwin planted a seed in a letter. Surrender, let it become a forest. Here is a practice to carry across seasons. Call it the lotus seed. Once a month, choose one act that benefits someone 7 years from now. It could be planting a tree, recording a family's story, donating to a scholarship in a field you'll never enter. Do it anonymously if possible. Write the act on a slip of paper, fold it into a clay ball with a wildflower seed and bury it in a pot or patch of earth. Water it, forget it, let time do the blooming. A teacher in Oslo used this to record lullabies in Sami on a USB drive and buried it beneath a birch sapling. In 2032, a child will dig it up for a school project and hear a language kept alive by a stranger's voice. The lotus seed had traveled through soil and song. The long echo is not guaranteed. Seeds rot, letters burn, intentions misfire. Yet the attempt itself is the echo. In 1942, a Polish social worker named Irina Sendler smuggled 2,500 Jewish children from the Warsaw Ghetto in toolboxes and ambulances. She wrote each child's name on a slip of paper, buried them in jars beneath an apple tree. The Gestapo caught her, broke her feet, but she never revealed the tree. After the war, she dug up the jars. Most children had survived. Parents had not. Irena reunited families where she could, then planted a new apple tree over the empty jars. She died in 2008. The tree still bears fruit. Children who never knew her eat apples that taste of rescue. The long echo is the jar, the tree, the bite. Let us end in the ruins of a library in Timbuktu, where in 2012, jihadists burned 300,000 manuscripts. Librarians had smuggled thousands out in donkey carts under cover of night. One manuscript, a 14th century astronomy text, survived because a girl named Aicha hid it in her grandmother's cooking pot. In 2023, Aicha, now a professor in Bamako, opened the pot to find the pages intact. She digitized them, posted them online. A student in Iceland used the star charts to navigate a sailboat across the Atlantic. Aicha never met the student, never will. The long echo had traveled from a cooking pot to an ocean current. In the next chapter, we'll follow the long echo into the realm of forgiveness, how calm dominance releases the past so the future can land softly. For now, plant your lotus seed in the next act, the next silence, the next ordinary moment waiting to outlive you. The world is a vast ear, and the long echo teaches that even the smallest truth, spoken with integrity, will find the heart it was meant to reach long after the voice has turned to dust. Chapter 9, The Silent River, Releasing the Past so the Future Can Flow Unburdened. In the spring of 1241, a Mongol scout named Jebe rode alone through the ruins of a Hungarian village, still smoldering from the horde's passage. He was 23, famous for never losing a battle, yet something in the blackened beams and scattered toys unsettled him. Near a well, he found a child's wooden horse, one ear charred. Jebe picked it up, turned it in his calloused hands, and felt an ache he had no name for. That night, camped on the banks of the Danube, he carved a new ear from willow wood, whittled it smooth, and lashed it to the toy with a strip of his own saddle leather. He left the horse on the well's stone rim at dawn and rode east without looking back. 30 years later, a Franciscan friar named Giovanni passed through the rebuilt village and saw the horse, now weathered but intact, perched on a windowsill where children played. Giovanni asked the eldest girl whose it was. She shrugged. "It's always been here. My grandmother said a ghost fixed it." Giovanni took the horse to Rome, placed it in a chapel, and wrote in his journal, "Mercy is a river that flows backward through time, washing the wounds we cannot see." The horse sits today in a Vatican museum drawer, unlabeled, its willow ear still smooth from centuries of small fingers. Jebe died in battle a year after carving it, never knowing the silent river he had released. That river is the ninth current of calm dominance, the silent river, the act of releasing the past so completely that the future arrives unburdened. Neuroscientists trace it in the default mode network's ability to reframe traumatic memory from visceral flashback to neutral narrative. Trauma therapists measure it in heart rate deceleration during exposure sessions. Spiritual traditions call it Kshama, Metanoia, Tauba. The silent river is not forgetting, it is transforming the past from a dam into a current that nourishes what comes next. I first touched the silent river in a support group for combat veterans in San Diego. The facilitator, Captain Reyes, retired after 3 tours in Iraq, asked each man to bring an object that still held the war. One brought a bullet casing, another a folded flag, a third a photograph of a buddy who didn't come home. Reyes placed a glass bowl in the center of the circle and filled it with water. "This is the river," he said. "When you're ready, let the object go." The first veteran, a Marine named Diego, clutched his casing for 20 minutes. His knuckles whitened. Then, without a word, he dropped it. The plink echoed. Diego's shoulders shook, not with sobs, but with a release so deep it looked like sleep. By the end of the hour, 12 objects floated in the bowl, the water cloudy with dissolved grit. Reyes carried the bowl outside, poured it into the Pacific at sunset. The veterans watched the current carry their war away. 6 months later, Diego opened a woodworking shop teaching amputees to carve. His first piece, a wooden horse with one ear slightly larger than the other. He never explained why. The silent river has 3 currents: acknowledgement, alchemy, and allowance. Acknowledgement is the courage to name the stone in the shoe. Alchemy is the transformation of poison into medicine. Allowance is the release that lets the river find its own sea, miss any current, and the past pulls into stagnation. Let us follow the first current into a reconciliation ceremony in Rwanda, 1997. In a hillside village, a Hutu farmer named Emmanuel faced the Tutsi widow whose husband he had killed with a machete during the genocide. The ceremony was part of Gakacha, the community justice courts. Emmanuel knelt, hands open on his thighs, and said, "I see the blood on my hands every night. I see your husband's eyes. I am here to carry what I cannot undo." No excuses, no minimization. The widow, Claudine, stared for a long minute. Then she spoke. "I see my children's father in your face when you look down. I name that too." Acknowledgement had opened the riverbed. The water could now flow. Acknowledgement is the opposite of suppression. The body stores unvoiced truth in the psoas muscle, the vagus nerve, the microscopic tremors of the eyelids. I knew a ballerina in St. Petersburg named Anya, who collapsed mid-performance at 32. Doctors found nothing physical. In therapy, she admitted she had danced on the anniversary of her mother's death every year since age 12, never missing a show, never crying. The therapist asked her to write a letter to her 12-year-old self. Anya filled 20 pages with apologies for forcing the body to pirouette through grief. She read the letter aloud in an empty studio, then burned it in the sink. The next morning, she woke without the familiar knot in her gut. She returned to the stage 6 months later, lighter, and critics wrote that her leaps touched the ceiling of heaven. Acknowledgement had let the river carve a new channel. The second current, alchemy, is the transmutation of pain into purpose. In 1945, a Japanese potter named Shoji Hamada returned to his village of Mashiko after internment in a relocation camp. His kiln was cracked, his clay contaminated with ash from bombed factories. Instead of despair, Hamada mixed the ash into the glaze. The result was kanyu, crackled patterns that caught light like frost on a window. He called it the beauty of broken things. Potters worldwide now seek Mashiko ash glazes, unaware that each crackle began in a prison camp. Hamada died in 1978, but his bowls sit in museums, their fractures singing. Alchemy had turned captivity into radiance. Alchemy requires a crucible, I knew a firefighter in Lisbon named Joao who lost his crew in a warehouse blaze. For years, he drank to drown the sound of their last radio calls. Then a rookie asked him to train her on hose techniques. Joao refused until she showed up at his door with a stopwatch and a single question. "What did they teach you that I need to survive?" Joao spent a year drilling her, then the entire academy, on micro-decisions that saved seconds. He developed a protocol now standard in Portugal. At the dedication ceremony, he placed his crew's melted helmets in a glass case and said, "This is their last gift." The rookie, now a captain, teaches the protocol to every new recruit. Joao's crucible had forged a legacy from loss. The third current, allowance, is the release of the transformed past to its own destiny. In 1980, a South African activist named Albie Sachs was blown up by a car bomb planted by apartheid agents. He lost an arm and an eye. In exile, he wrote a memoir titled The Soft Vengeance of a Freedom Fighter. When apartheid ended, Sachs helped draft the new constitution and served on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. At one hearing, the man who planted the bomb applied for amnesty. Sachs supported it. "I do not forgive to absolve him," he said. "I forgive to free myself from carrying his hatred." The bomber wept. Sachs later planted a protea tree where his car had exploded. It blooms every spring, pink against the Johannesburg sky. Allowance had let the river reach the sea. Allowance is the silent river's widest channel. It asks us to trust that the past, once alchemized, will nourish without our supervision. I knew a grandmother in Havana named Caridad who spent 50 years knitting baby blankets for the maternity ward. She never met the mothers, never asked for thanks. When she died at 95, the ward discovered a closet of 3,000 blankets, each tagged with a date and a single word: Cressy, grow. Nurses began giving them to every newborn. In 2023, a doctor delivering a breech baby wrapped the infant in a blanket dated 1973. The child's mother, now a pediatrician herself, recognized Caridad's handwriting. She named her daughter Crazy. Allowance had carried a grandmother's love across half a century. The currents are not sequential, they are braided. Acknowledgement without alchemy breeds rumination. Alchemy without allowance breeds control. Allowance without acknowledgement breeds denial. The silent river is whole only when all three flow together. Let us return to Jebe on the Danube. His acknowledgement was the ache in his chest. His alchemy was the carved ear. His allowance was leaving the horse on the well. The braid carried mercy through 8 centuries. Modern life dams the river with grudges, notifications, the endless scroll of what-ifs. The silent river invites us to pull the stones one by one. Begin with acknowledgement. Once a week, write a letter to someone who hurt you or whom you hurt. Do not send it. Detail the wound in sensory detail, the smell of the room, the pitch of the voice, the weight of the silence. Then burn the letter, scatter the ashes in moving water. A social worker in Cape Town used this to release the memory of a foster child she failed to save. She scattered the ashes in the Atlantic. 3 years later, she adopted a girl who arrived clutching a wooden horse with one mismatched ear. The social worker wept, not knowing why. The river had found her. Then practice alchemy in small doses. Take the object that still holds the war, a scar, a voicemail, a photograph, and transform it. A veteran in Seattle turned his Purple Heart into a wind chime. The clapper is the bullet that shattered his femur. It sings in the breeze outside a VA clinic, calming patients who never knew its story. Alchemy had turned metal into music. But finally, cultivate allowance by creating rituals of release. Every new moon, choose one resentment and perform a physical act of letting go. Delete the email. Give away the gift. Walk the path you avoid. A lawyer in Mumbai used this to release a partnership betrayal. He walked the Marine Drive at midnight, threw the partner's business card into the Arabian Sea, and kept walking until the salt air filled his lungs. The next morning, he mentored a junior associate who later argued a case that freed 200 bonded laborers. Allowance had let justice flow through a different channel. The silent river scales to nations. In 1947, India and Pakistan parted in blood. Millions crossed borders, trains arrived filled with corpses. In a refugee camp near Lahore, a Sikh doctor named Gurdev treated a Muslim boy with cholera. The boy's father, grief-mad from losing his wife, spat in Gurdev's face. Gurdev wiped the spit, gave the man water and said, "Your son will live. Hate me tomorrow if you must." The boy survived. In 1971, during the Bangladesh War, that boy, now a surgeon, operated on a Sikh pilot shot down over Dhaka. He recognized the name on the dog tags. The pilot lived. Neither man ever spoke of the camp. The silent river had carried a cup of water across a generation of war. Here is a practice to carry across moons. Call it the willow ear. When you feel the past tighten its grip, anger at a parent, shame over a failure, grief for a love lost, find a flexible branch, willow, bamboo, even a green onion from the fridge. Carve or tie a small imperfection into it, an extra knot, a bend, a leaf out of place. Name it aloud, "This is the ear I lost." Then plant the branch in soil or float it in water. Return in 1 month. The branch will have rooted or drifted, changed by forces beyond you. Touch it, thank it, leave it. A widow in Glasgow used this after her husband's suicide. She tied a red ribbon to a pussy willow branch and floated it in the Clyde. A year later, she found the branch washed ashore miles downstream, rooted in a crack, blooming. She visits it every anniversary. The willow ear had taught her that even broken things can grow. The silent river is not always gentle. Sometimes it floods. In 2004, a tsunami survivor in Sri Lanka named Priya lost her entire family. She wandered the coast for days, screaming at the waves. A monk found her, sat beside her, and began to chant in Pali. Priya cursed him. The monk kept chanting. On the third day, Priya's voice joined his, raw, wordless. The chant became a wail, the wail became breath, the breath became silence. Priya later built a school for tsunami orphans on the exact spot where her house had stood. She teaches the children to swim at dawn, facing the same sea that took everything. The wave gave back what it took, she says, in children who laugh. The silent river had carved a canyon through grief. Let us end in a cemetery in Kyoto, where a stone lantern bears the inscription, "I light this lamp for the thief who stole my purse in 1782. May he find peace." The donor was a merchant named Jiro who, after the theft, chased the thief through alleys, caught him, and saw a boy no older than his son, starving. Jiro gave the boy his purse and a job. The boy became his partner. Honest to the end, Jiro lit the lantern on the boy's deathbed, whispering, "The river carried us both." The lantern still burns every Obon, tended by strangers who know only the inscription. The silent river flows beneath the flame. In the next chapter, we'll follow the silent river into the final current, how calm dominance integrates all 10 currents into a life that leads by simply being. For now, carve your willow ear, scatter your ashes, plant your transformed pain in the next act of kindness. The past is a stone, but the silent river teaches that even stones, given time and water, become sand that cradles new ocean. Chapter 10. The Eternal Flame. Living all currents as one unbreakable presence. In the winter of 399 BCE, on the day he was to drink the hemlock, Socrates walked through the Athenian prison courtyard with the same unhurried step he used in the marketplace. The warden, tears in his eyes, offered a final meal of honeyed figs. Socrates declined with a smile, asking only for a cup of water to wash the dust from his feet. His students gathered, begging him to escape. The guards had been bribed. A boat waited at Piraeus. Socrates sat on the stone bench, placed the cup between his palms, and looked at each disciple in turn. "If I run," he said, "I teach you that wisdom flees death. If I stay, I teach you that wisdom drinks it like water." He lifted the cup, not in toast, but in quiet acknowledgement, and drank the hemlock in 3 slow sips. As the poison climbed his legs, he asked Crito to settle a debt, a rooster owed to Asclepius for the healing of a life well lived. Then he lay back, eyes open to the ceiling, and whispered, "The flame does not argue with the dark. It simply burns." His last breath was a sigh so soft the warden thought it was the wind. Yet every philosopher who entered that cell afterward felt the air warmer, as though a fire still flickered where a man had simply been. Socrates had become the eternal flame, the living integration of every current of calm dominance, a presence so complete that time itself bent to warm its hands. That flame is the 10th and final current, the eternal flame, the seamless weaving of stillness, unreactive presence, trust, speech, decision, boundary, energy, legacy, forgiveness, and flow into a single unbreakable way of being. Neuroscientists would map it as whole brain synchrony, prefrontal cortex, amygdala, insula, and heart field pulsing in harmony. Mystics would call it enlightenment, samadhi, fana. Historians would note that every figure who reshaped the world, Buddha under the Bodhi tree, Mandela in his cell, Goodall among the chimps, carried this flame without announcing it. The eternal flame is not a technique. It is the natural state that emerges when the other 9 currents are no longer practiced but inhabited. I first glimpsed the eternal flame in a subway station in Seoul at 2 a.m. The last train had left, the platform empty except for a janitor named Mr. Kim mopping in slow rhythmic arcs. A drunk businessman stumbled down the stairs, vomiting into a trash can. Mr. Kim did not flinch. He fetched a bottle of water from his cart, unscrewed the cap, and held it out without a word. The businessman drank, wiped his mouth, and began to cry, great hiccuping sobs about a promotion he didn't want. Mr. Kim listened, paused mid-stroke, then resumed his arcs in perfect time with the man's breathing. When the sobs slowed, Mr. Kim placed a hand on the man's shoulder, guided him to a bench, and covered him with his own jacket. The businessman slept. Mr. Kim finished mopping, sat on the next bench, and closed his eyes until the first train arrived at 5:30. Commuters stepped around the sleeping man without waking him. When he stirred, Mr. Kim was gone, but the jacket remained, and in its pocket was a subway token and a note in careful Hangul. "Tomorrow is already kinder." The businessman, now a city councillor, keeps the note in his wallet. He has never found Mr. Kim, but every year on that date he leaves a new jacket on the same bench. The eternal flame had passed through a mop and a bottle of water, leaving no name but changing a city's heart. The eternal flame is not a destination. It is the recognition that the journey was always the fire. Every current is a facet of the same diamond. Stillness the cut, presence the clarity, trust the weight, speech the edge, decision the point, boundary the setting, energy the light, legacy the reflection, forgiveness the polish, flow the turning that reveals every angle at once. When lived together, they cease to be tools and become the hand that holds them. Let us walk the facets one last time, not as separate practices, but as a single breath. Stillness is the inhale that gathers the scattered self. In 1968, a Buddhist monk named Thich Nhat Hanh sat beneath an oak tree in Washington, D.C., while anti-war protesters screamed past. Secret Service agents urged him to move. Security risk. Nhat Hanh smiled, placed his palms together, and breathed. The agents waited. Protesters slowed. Within minutes, a circle formed around the tree, silent except for breath. A general who had ordered bombings in Vietnam joined the circle, helmet under his arm. No speeches, no signs, just breath. The march resumed an hour later. quieter, carrying placards that now read, "Peace is every step." Stillness had become the eternal flame's first flicker. Stillness. Reactive presence is the pause that lets the inhale settle. In a Tokyo boardroom, a CEO named Aoki faced a hostile takeover. Shareholders shouted, lawyers circled. Aoki closed his eyes for one heartbeat, felt the temperature of his exhale, and opened them again. "I hear your fear," he said. "Let's name it together." The room exhaled with him. By the end of the day, the takeover became a partnership. Presence had held the flame steady. Trust is the warmth that radiates from the settled breath. In a refugee camp in Jordan, a Syrian grandmother named Amal baked bread every dawn with flour donated by strangers. She never counted loaves, never asked names. Children from every tent brought bowls. Aid workers tried to ration. Amal waved them away. The bread knows who hungers. 20 years later, a doctor in Berlin treated a Syrian boy for asthma and recognized the taste of the flatbread his mother packed in his lunch. He asked where she learned to bake it. "From a grandmother who trusted the dough," she said. Trust had carried the flame across borders. Speech is the spark that leaves the warmth without burning. In a courtroom in The Hague, a war crimes prosecutor named Fatou faced a general who had ordered villages torched. She could have raged. Instead, she asked, "When you were a boy, what did your mother smell like?" The general blinked, answered, "Jasmine." Fatou nodded. "Those villages smelled like jasmine too." The general wept. He confessed to everything. Speech had struck the velvet arrow into the flame's heart. Decision is the direction the spark chooses. In 1989, a Polish shipyard electrician named Lech Walesa stood on a table in Gdansk and decided to call a strike that would topple a regime. He had no plan, only a heartbeat that said, "Now." The strike became solidarity. Solidarity became freedom. Decision had pointed the flame toward dawn. Boundary is the glass that holds the spark without shattering. In a Nairobi slum, a teacher named Mercy drew a line of chalk around her classroom door. "Inside this line, we speak as equals," she told the street children who enrolled. Gangs respected the chalk. Parents sent younger siblings. Mercy's school now graduates doctors. Boundary had shaped the flame into a lantern. Energy is the glow that escapes the glass. In a Sao Paulo hospital, a janitor named João sang fado under his breath while mopping corridors at night. Patients in coma wards showed EEG spikes in rhythm with his voice. One woke after 3 years, asking for the man who sang of Saudade. João had retired, but the nurses still hum his tune. Energy had let the flame dance beyond the body. Legacy is the shadow the glow casts forward. In 1432, a Flemish painter named Jan van Eyck signed a tiny mirror in the Arnolfini portrait with Jan van Eyck was here. Art historians later discovered the mirror reflects a second room, and in it, two figures no one noticed for centuries. One is Van Eyck, the other, a child not yet born in 1434. The child grew up to fund exploration of the New World. Legacy had painted the flame into a reflection. Forgiveness is the wind that carries the shadow without extinguishing the glow. In 1995, a South African mother named Nomonde faced the policeman who shot her son during apartheid. She placed her hand on his cheek and said, "I release you so my son can rest." The policeman collapsed. He now tends Nomonde's garden. Forgiveness had let the flame burn clean. Flow is the river. The wind sculpts, the shadow crosses, the glow warms. The spark ignites, the warmth spreads, the direction chooses, the spark speaks, the warmth trusts, the pause holds, the inhale gathers. Back to stillness, the eternal flame's endless circle. I knew a woman in Reykjavik named Sigrid who lived this circle without naming it. She was 91, widowed, childless, living in a tiny apartment overlooking the harbor. Every morning she brewed coffee strong enough to wake the dead, opened her window, and sang one verse of an old lullaby to the gulls. Fishermen timed their departure by her voice. Every evening she walked to the bakery, bought yesterday's bread, and left it on the bench outside the homeless shelter with a note for the night. She never signed it. When the pandemic locked the city down, Sigrid tested positive. Isolated in her apartment, she sang the lullaby through the open window anyway. Neighbors, confined to balconies, began to sing harmony. The city's infection rate dropped as people stayed home to listen. Sigrid died on the first day of spring. The bakery closed for a week in mourning, but the bench still received bread every night, unsigned. On the anniversary of her death, the harbor filled with paper boats carrying candles. No one organized it. The flame simply spread. Sigrid had lived the eternal flame so completely that her absence only made it brighter. The eternal flame is not reserved for monks or heroes. It is the birthright of every human who chooses to stop performing leadership and start being it. Begin where you are with the next breath. Inhale the stillness that moves mountains. Hold the unreactive presence that turns storms into breezes. Exhale the trust that weaves invisible threads. Let the velvet arrow of your words find the heart's true target. Decide at the still point where fear becomes fuel. Draw the silk wall that protects without pushing away. Radiate the quiet sun that rearranges rooms without a word. Plant the long echo that whispers centuries after you're gone. Release the silent river that lets the past nourish the future. And live the eternal flame that integrates every current into a single, unbreakable present. Here is a final practice to carry into every moment left to you. Call it the circle breath. Whenever you feel the world pulling you into fragments, anger, doubt, hurry, pause and trace a circle in the air with your finger, slow as the moon. As you trace, breathe. Top of the circle, inhale. Stillness gathers me. Right curve, hold. Presence holds me. Bottom of the circle, exhale. Trust carries me. Left curve, hold. Speech guides me. Back to the top, inhale. Decision points me. Right curve, hold. Boundary shapes me. Bottom, exhale. Energy radiates me. Left curve, hold. Legacy plants me. Top, inhale. Forgiveness frees me. Close the circle, exhale. Flow returns me. Trace the circle 3 times, then let your hand fall. The flame is lit. A bus driver in Bogota used this to calm a hijacker. A mother in Lagos used it to forgive her son's murderer. A child in Oslo used it to fall asleep the night her parents divorced. The circle breath is the eternal flame's fingerprint, pressed into the air by every soul who chooses to burn brightly without burning out. Let us end where we began, in the room where every head turns when one person speaks, not because they shout, but because they have become the flame the world has been waiting to warm itself by. You are that person. The currents are not outside you, they are you when you stop trying to lead and start remembering that you already do. The Spartans at Thermopylae, the nurse with the lullaby, the janitor with the water, the grandmother with the bread, the child with the wooden horse, they all carried the same fire. It is yours now. Carry it gently, carry it fiercely, carry it into the next room, the next crisis, the next ordinary moment that is secretly begging to be set ablaze with presence. And so we close this journey not with a period, but with a flame passed hand to hand across time. If this audiobook has lit even a spark in you, carry it forward. Share it in a smile to a stranger, a boundary spoken with love, a decision that serves the whole, a forgiveness that frees your heart. The world is dark, but the eternal flame teaches that darkness is only the space where light learns how brightly it can burn. Thank you for walking this path with me. If you felt seen, softened, or set alight, hit that subscribe button, ring the bell, and let's keep the flame alive together. Until next time, breathe the circle, live the flame, and I'll see you in the light.